Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Cummings. I'm the director here at the PA CareerLink Bucks County. I'd like to welcome everyone to our WED Talk today, Ask the Employment Attorney. Now I'd like to toss it over to Billy Barnes, Executive Director of the Workforce and Economic Development Board.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. I'm Billy Barnes, Executive Director of Workforce and Economic Development for the County of Bucks. Today is the 7th webinar in the WED Talk series designed for employers and employment professionals. Thank you for being a part of these innovative discussions led by workforce experts. Whether you are brand new to the webinar series or have previously participated, I hope you will share this resource with colleagues on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. WED Talks will continue throughout 2022 with more best practices, industry trends, and hot topics in the workplace. Please help spread the word within your networks so we can bring more professionals into the conversation each month to spark new ideas and promote innovative strategies for success. Now, I would like to turn things over to my colleague, Anita Waters. Good morning, Anita.
Thank you, Billy. Today, I am pleased to introduce our WED Talk presenter, Nancy Abrams, Esquire. For more than 30 years, Nancy has concentrated her legal practice in the areas of labor and employment law. She has significant experience in traditional labor and employment-related issues involving private industry and the nursing home industry, and has worked with many management teams in the manufacturing, healthcare, and service industries. Nancy has authored numerous articles on employment-related topics for industry publications such as Personnel, Rental Management, Personnel Administration, Journal of Commerce and Finance, and Honeywell Monthly. She has also applied her legal experience as a past adjunct professor at Drexel University, as a participant in Pennsylvania Bar Institute's CLE seminars on employment law, and as an instructor for numerous seminars for Sterling and Lorman Education Services. Before joining Spector, Gadden, and Rosen, she practiced with several Philadelphia law firms, well regarded for successful representation of high-profile cases that involve a wide variety of workplace-related issues. A member of the Pennsylvania Bar Association and the American Arbitration Association, Nancy served as co-chair of the Philadelphia Bar Association's Theater Wing and is the chair of the board of directors of Fever Dream Repertory, a professional theater group in Philadelphia. Nancy is admitted to practice in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, the U.S. District Courts of the Eastern and Middle Districts of Pennsylvania, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and the state of Florida. Welcome, Nancy. Thank you so much for leading our discussion today.
Thank you so much for having me. Welcome, everybody. Just so you know what I'll be doing, I will be going over what has become a very hot topic, which are the vaccine and mask mandates, both federal, state, local, and I'll talk about that for about half an hour, and then I'm going to open it up to questions, and the questions don't have to be limited to the topic that we're talking about. They can be about anything regarding employment law, which includes wage and hour issues, OSHA issues, discrimination issues, anything employment related that you have a question about, I will be happy to address if I can. So if we can have the first slide in my presentation, please. This is the big news. President Biden issued orders that every employer with 100 employees or more had to require their employees to be vaccinated, or they'd have to go undergo weekly COVID testing and produce negative results on a weekly basis prior to coming to work. That mandate also required that there be a plan in place. Employers have a plan in place by December 6th, which is 2 days ago, and that they must implement the weekly testing for unvaccinated employees by January 4, meaning that people either had to be vaccinated or undergo the testing by January 4. There are several federal district courts who blocked that mandate. The judge found that it went beyond OSHA's purview. The rules were to be issued by OSHA, and that's the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, for those who don't know. So because they were courts in various areas of the country, they drew lots and decided that the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals was the one that was going to decide the fate of the vaccine mandates. So we're waiting on that. But in the meantime, the vaccine mandates are on hold. Now, thank you. The order also, no, go back one, please. Thank you. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead one. I thought you skipped one. Thank you. Okay. The mandate also required federal employees and federal contractors. There was a vaccine mandate in place for them, but there was an option that they could either get vaccinated or undergo regular testing instead of getting vaccinated. And it lifted that choice and said you have to get vaccinated by January 18. You can no longer choose to get tested. Again, the federal courts stepped in and said, no, that's too broad. You can't do that. And that decision came down very recently on November 30, and that has also been appealed. So, but in the meantime, that is on hold as well. Next slide. Thank you. It also required healthcare workers, any healthcare worker who worked for a business that got Medicare or Medicaid reimbursements, which is basically almost any medical practice, hospitals, nursing homes, it put as a condition to continuing to receive Medicare and Medicaid funds that they had to be vaccinated by December 6th. That was also blocked by the same federal courts on November 30, so that again is on hold. So as a practical matter, what does that mean for you employers who are out there in the world? Obviously, if you're not in healthcare, you're not a government contractor, you have less than 100 employees, this rule didn't affect you anyway. But what does that mean as far as your choice as an employer regarding vaccine mandates? A lot of employers, including my office and most of my clients, are requiring that their employees be vaccinated. And that's something that an employer has the option of requiring or not requiring. You can also decide whether or not to have alternatives. For example, if employees aren't vaccinated, you can require weekly testing and that they bring in a negative result before reporting to work every week on Monday or whatever the start of your work week is. You can require employees who are not vaccinated to wear a mask whenever they are in your business. You can require proof of vaccine from your customers. You can require that customers be masked when they're in your business. This is all very discretionary when it comes to employers. However, if you are requiring vaccines, there is, and to some extent masks, there is one condition. Can I have the next slide, please? All of the rules require that you provide a reasonable accommodation if there is a disability or a health reason why the person cannot be vaccinated or cannot wear a mask. And there's also a requirement that a reasonable accommodation be provided to employees who have sincerely held religious beliefs that preclude them from receiving a vaccine. The reasonable accommodation for medical is fairly straightforward and easy. It's the same way that you would deal with a request for a reasonable accommodation for any medical reason. You can require certification by the employee's healthcare provider that they need the accommodation and what accommodation is needed and why. It could be that the employee is immunosuppressed. It could be that the employee is allergic to some component of the vaccine. And all of those would be legitimate reasons why you would have to allow an employee to not be vaccinated, even if you have a blanket policy that all employees must be vaccinated. In those cases, what we have been recommending is that those employees must be masked while they're in the workplace and that they provide weekly testing. But again, that is at the discretion of the employer. I mean, the impetus here to the alternatives is to keep those people that the unvaccinated employee comes into contact safe in case the unvaccinated employee does contract COVID. The harder accommodation is the sincerely held religious belief. And I have a lot of clients who are kind of struggling with that. They get notes from employees who just say that my religion precludes me from getting this vaccine. What really is required, and we've had them require to get some sort of a certification, a letter, some documentation from their religious leader saying what in the religion precludes them from getting the vaccine. And there are some religious leaders who will provide that readily, whether the religion really precludes it or not. There are other religious leaders who are saying, no, you're not going to hide behind our religion just because you don't want to get the vaccine. So one of the ways that we explore it is, for example, if the individual gets other vaccines, for example, gets a flu shot, then their religion doesn't preclude getting this type of vaccination. It's just that they don't want to get it. On the other hand, if the person, we've had individuals who come and say, according to my religion, we don't take any preventive measures. I don't get any vaccines. It is just, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And under those circumstances, I recommend to the clients that they generally do allow the employee to not be vaccinated. I think that there is going to be a fair amount of litigation on this exemption once employers are requiring vaccines, because it really is a little bit amorphous, and there actually has already been litigation. I don't remember the employer, but it was one of the larger employers who is accused of refusing to give a reasonable accommodation for a sincerely held religious belief, and that is now before the courts. And that case might give some guidance as to what really is required for that exemption, because there really is very little guidance at the moment on that. One thing to remember is that both of these exemptions apply only to the vaccination requirement. If employers have a testing requirement in place for someone who cannot be vaccinated, that is not subject to the exemption. You can still require that they undergo weekly COVID testing or masking, social distancing, that sort of thing as well. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. If the rules, the OSHA rules that were mandated by the president do eventually go into effect, there are some pretty high penalties. If employers who don't comply with the mandate can be fined up to $14,000 per violation. One thing that you have to keep in mind too is if this does go into effect and you are covered, that the employer has to provide paid time off for the employees to get vaccinated or to recover from any side effects of getting vaccinated. If you remember back to when everybody was in lockdown and there were rules in place about providing paid time off for employees who had to, who tested positive or who had self-quarantine or had child care issues, that you were required to provide paid time off if you were 500 employees or less, and that probably affected a lot of the people in the audience here, and that paid time off was offset by a tax credit against the withholdings that you had to submit to the government. And so it was really zero sum to you. This paid time off would be handled the same way, that you can take it as a tax credit, but you would be required to give the paid time off for employees to get vaccinated or to recover from side effects. And again, if you put a mandate into place as well, that's something that you should consider providing as well. Just as a good practice is that, and that would again help to motivate your employees to go out and actually get the vaccines. Okay, I also have some information about the way Philadelphia is handling vaccine and mask mandates. I know that this is limited to Philadelphia. I know that Bucks County is not as strict regarding masking and vaccine requirements as the city is, but I want to go through these because these are things that employers can keep in mind. In the city of Philadelphia, businesses must require employees, patrons, and vendors be vaccinated in order to enter the business, or require everyone who enters to wear a mask. Generally, any building in Philadelphia that you go into that is open to the public has a masking requirement for common areas. I know in Bucks County it is not as universal. However, businesses can choose to require masks. Businesses can choose to require proof of vaccination, and many do. And that is your choice as an employer to require it or not require it. Under the rule issued by Mayor Kenny, businesses and institutions that require vaccines for all employees, patrons, and vendors are technically exempt from the mask requirement, but again, in common areas of every building in Center City, Philadelphia, you'll see a mask required sign. Can I have the next slide, please? Related to the previous one, the essential businesses, grocery stores, pharmacies, doctor's office, urgent care, had to mandate that all staff and patrons wear masks in their facilities, regardless of whether or not they're vaccinated. And prior to this new rule, they could provide an exemption for fully vaccinated. I know that some places masks are required unless you're vaccinated, and then it's up to your discretion. And I believe it's still that way in the counties. In the city now, in essential businesses, masks are mandatory whether people are vaccinated or not. Next slide. Indoor dining. In Center City, I don't know about out in Bucks County as much, but in Center City, there are what are now referred to as streeteries. A lot of the restaurants set up physical structures on the street or on the sidewalk and have outdoor dining. Indoor dining came back in the fall, and if most require, in Center City, most require proof of vaccination and masks when you're not seated at the table. I know in Bucks County, that requirement is not in place. They don't ask for proof of vaccine, and whether you wear a mask is voluntary. Again, that is up to the individual business owner and can change from business to business. Next, please. Thank you. Mandatory vaccines in Philadelphia for healthcare and higher education workers went into effect in August as well. And the that rule specifically provided for medical and religious exemptions, but said if an employee is exempt, there has to be semi-weekly testing for any employee once every 2 weeks. Next slide. And that also was extended in Philadelphia to universities, colleges, and junior colleges. So basically, at this point, everything is up to the discretion of the employer outside of the city of Philadelphia. There is no state law or regulation that requires vaccination or masking. It's really left up to individual municipalities. As I said, Philadelphia has had a masking and vaccination policy in place, and that's expected to continue. But as an employer, you can decide what the policy is for your business, as long as you keep it in mind that you have to provide these reasonable accommodations for religious and for medical reasons. So that is the current state of vaccine and mask mandates. And the slide says questions regarding mask and vaccine mandates, but really, if you have questions regarding any employment law issues, wage and hour, health and safety, discrimination, I would be happy to answer those as well. I know that a couple questions were submitted before when people registered. Why don't we deal with those first?
Okay. Thank you very much, Nancy. Just a moment while I pull those questions up. And if anyone else has a question, you can go into your control panel. Please put it in the questions Q&A feature, and we will get to those as soon as possible. Okay, so Nancy, one question that came through actually related to childcare. How to stay open and not get sick again while caring for young children. Childcare is of the utmost priority right now.
That's a really difficult area, and I know that child care has been a serious issue throughout the pandemic, both in terms of homeschooling, the fact that for a long time child care centers weren't open at all. Now that vaccines are available for children as young as 5, I think helps, at least with the school issues. I know that schools, however, in most cases are still requiring their students to be masked at school. They haven't required vaccines yet, but children who are too young to be vaccinated, it's a problem. And the best thing that you can do is that if you yourself are vaccinated and you send your child to school masked, and you know, a lot of parents were saying, well, the young kids aren't going to like it, they're not going to keep the mask on. And just anecdotally talking to parents, surprisingly, most of the kids don't have a problem with it, and that they put it on and it stays on, and there isn't an issue. Obviously, you know, I remember when my daughter was in daycare and in school, she would inevitably pick something up 2 or 3 times during the school year. And I think that that's going to continue. There's really no way to be completely protected. And the best thing you can do is, you know, if you yourself are vaccinated and boosted, you know, I got my booster as soon as I was able to, and wear a mask when you're in indoor public places. That's really your best protection. There is no silver bullet, unfortunately, that is going to keep you and your children from getting sick. But if you practice good health protections yourself, it's less likely that you or other members of your family will get seriously ill.
All right, thank you,
Next
Nancy.
question.
Sure, there were a few questions which I believe you covered in the presentation. These are the questions. Will all employees in PA be required to wear masks soon? And is the federal mandate in effect because my company is not complying?
Okay, as I said, I'm going to handle the second one first. As I said, the federal mandates are now on hold, so that it's not in place. So your employer doesn't have to comply with vaccine mandates yet. It's kind of surprising. Well, I shouldn't say surprising because at this point, nothing really surprises me. But most of my clients are requiring vaccines. And again, that at this point is the employer's prerogative. If the vaccine mandates are upheld by the courts and do go into effect, that's when your employer will have to comply with the mandate. On a Pennsylvania state level, there are no vaccine or masking mandates in place at this time. That could change. Part of the issue is that the legislature is much more conservative. It is governed by the Republicans, and we have a Democratic governor, so there is a little bit of tension there between policies. But at this moment, there is no statewide mandate for either masking or for vaccines, so it's really up to the municipality and the individual employer.
Thank you, Nancy. Couple questions are coming in. One question just came in. Are vaccine mandates law? And how is the employer exposed to liability if the mandate conflicts with HIPAA Act violation when it conflicts with the mandate?
Okay, first of all, asking about vaccine status is not a HIPAA violation. So that's why businesses can ask to see your vaccine card. So as long as you're not asking about underlying health conditions, just asking about vaccine status is not a HIPAA violation. If the mandates are upheld by the court, it's not a law, it's a regulation. It's the same, it's to be enforced by OSHA, which is the federal agency that administers health and safety regulations for businesses. They were the ones who were to put in the rules regarding the vaccine and masking mandates and testing, and they're the ones who actually did issue the rules. If the court's injunction blocking them is lifted and the appeals courts say, no, this did not go beyond OSHA's purview to issue these, then they would have the effect of law and employers can be penalized under those regulations the same way as if OSHA came into your business and found an unsafe condition, or somebody's injured and they do an inspection and say, well, you should have had a guard on this machine, and because the guard wasn't there, that's why the person got injured, and they can fine you. It would be similar to any other type of OSHA regulation.
Thank you, Nancy. I don't see any other questions that have come in. If you do have a question in the next minute or two, please put them into the questions feature. Nancy, is there anything else you wanted to cover while we're waiting for some questions to come through?
Well, while we're waiting for questions to come through, I thought that I would leave the very contentious vaccine and masking issues and talk about just some general employment stuff. One of the biggest areas where employers, and particularly small employers, get into trouble is wage and hour issues. And in Pennsylvania, you have to remember that in most cases, if there's a federal law and a state law, the federal law trumps the state law. But in wage and hour, if the state law gives the employee more rights than the federal law, then the employer has to follow the state law. In Pennsylvania, the wage and hour law is a little stricter than the federal Fair Labor Standards Act. For example, in the Fair Labor Standards Act, you have a little bit more flexibility, and they look at each pay period, which could be semi-monthly, it could be biweekly. In Pennsylvania, they look at each week individually, regardless of what a pay period is. Now, the biggest area where employers, and particularly small employers, get into trouble is exemptions. As I'm sure you all know, that a hourly non-exempt employee has to be paid time and a half for all hours over 40 in a work week. If somebody is a salaried exempt employee, then it doesn't matter how many hours they work in the work week, as long as they get their flat salary. And there's a few minor exemptions to that, but I'm not going to go into those. Then you don't have to pay anything extra, any premium for that work week. Where employers get into trouble is in determining exactly who is exempt. One of the big mistakes that I see over and over is there are three main exemptions. There is the professional exemption, the executive exemption, and the administrative exemption. The professional and executive are pretty straightforward, although some employers, particularly I see this in retail, the store manager clearly is exempt. The assistant manager may or may not, depending on how many employees they supervise, because to be an exempt executive employee, you have to supervise at least two individuals. So, and also you can't be a working supervisor unless it's only occasionally that you do. So that a lot of retail employers have been dinged by wage and hour because they classify assistant managers as exempt, and they say, well, they're not really exempt. You have to go back and pay them overtime. The biggest problem, though, comes under the administrative, because what a lot of employers do is they will take all of their administrative assistants, secretaries, whatever, call them administrative assistants, pay them a salary and say, you're exempt. But the test is broader than that. And somebody who just does routine secretarial work probably will not fall within the exemption. And Wage and Hour will go and they will audit you for between 2 and 3 years, depending on whether they find it's willful or not. And you'll have to pay overtime for all of that time. The other area in Wage and Hour that is particularly problematic is making sure that you keep proper time records. And this includes not only the time your employees arrive at work and the time they leave, but if you have an unpaid meal break, and to be unpaid, a break has to be at least 20 minutes. And a lot of employers don't require employees to sign out, clock out, whatever, at the beginning of the meal period and clock back in when it is over. So what happens is you get a disgruntled employee, they go to Wage and Hour, they say, I've not been paid for lunch, but I don't really get a lunch. I sit at my desk, I still have to answer the phone, whatever. And if there are not time records where the employee signed out and then signed back in, Wage and Hour is going to believe the employee. And the employer is going to be on the hook for all of that extra time and time and a half. So it's very important that you keep accurate time records, and that if there is an unpaid break, that the employee sign out and sign back in. It's equally important that the employee, if you're giving them a break, that they really be allowed to take the break, and that you're not requiring them to be sitting at their desk, answering the phone, answering emails while they're on their lunch break, because again, that really is paid time and not break time for them. So if anybody has any kind of Wage and Hour questions, put it in the box and I will be happy to answer it.
Thank you, Nancy. A couple questions have come in. First, are tax credits still available to employers to offset sick pay for employees who get COVID?
I am not sure whether that has been extended again. I know that after the mandate that you provided expired at the end of last year, the credit itself was extended. And at this particular point, I don't know if it's still in effect. What I will do is I will find out, and I will let the people at the center know, and they can let you know for sure. I believe it may be, but it may have expired. So I'm going to check that and get the answer back to you.
Next question is, are we allowed to require employees to be vaccinated at hotels?
I'm sorry, what was the end of that?
Are we allowed to require employees to be vaccinated at hotels?
You can require employees to be vaccinated. If you are the employer, you can require employees to be vaccinated at your discretion. In this country, most employees are employees at will, and you can impose any reasonable any kind of rule that does not put their safety into question and requiring vaccines is specifically not in that category. So if you're a hotel and you want your employees to be vaccinated, absolutely, you can require that your employees be vaccinated.
Thank you.
And
Last question. Go ahead.
And so there are employers who have fired employees who refuse to get vaccinated. They don't have to provide a weekly testing alternative, although a lot of my clients do. They can have a policy saying you either get vaccinated or you lose your job. And that has been enforced, and there's nothing unlawful about that.
Thank you. Last question here. Is an employer required to pay an employee when they have requested to work from home while quarantining, or do they have to use their sick leave?
If somebody is actually working from home, then they must be paid. If under the wage and hour laws, if you, and the word is suffer an employee to provide services, if you permit them to work, they have to be paid for the time that they actually work. If they are quarantining and they are not actually working from home, then you can either require them, now that the law that required the paid sick leave has expired, you can choose to not pay them or require them to use sick leave as long as they are not actually working during the time they're quarantined. Did that make sense?
Thank you. Thank you. So I do not see any other questions, Nancy.
Okay, well, if you think of something after the talk is ended, just let the center know and they will forward me an email and I will shoot an answer back to them. But I appreciate your attendance. I know that particularly vaccines are a very contentious topic right now, and outside of the city of Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, it's really up to the discretion of the employer for now. It will be interesting to see what the courts do with the federal mandate, and I will make sure that the center knows what happens when it happens. And I thank you for your time and attention.
Nancy, this is Brian Cummings. I just want to say thank you for joining and speaking today and presenting for on behalf of the PA Curling Bucks County. We all appreciate you, your time, and certainly your information as well. I also want to thank everybody that attended today. I appreciate everybody jumping on and joining us today for our WED Talk. And again, Nancy, one last thank you. We really appreciate you providing your time and all of the information. It was certainly useful.
It is my pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, everyone, have a great day and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you.